上一集我们了解了关于整个波兰如何陷入了共产集权的历史，那现在要开始讲1980到1990年代波兰人推翻苏共统治的过程。那么我们在进入今天的话题之前，我要非常感谢不当党产委员会赞助这一系列的影片，有你们的帮助，我才有办法到格但斯克做一些介绍给我的台湾观众，让台湾人更加的了解波兰的转型正义。1980年8月14日，电共莱赫华勒沙 Lech Wałęsa， 后来也是我们波兰的前总统之一，当时有反对波兰共产主义政府的工人运动，他是工人运动的发起人之一。那么在1980年8月14日，莱赫华勒沙正式的领导了全波兰的罢工。那一次抗议活动的要求又包含让Anna Valentinowicz 安娜回到她的岗位，还有建立1970年12月被共产党屠杀的人的雕像。对于共产主义不太了解的朋友们可能会问，可是共产主义是要拿来保障工人的，不是吗？那工人怎么又会反对社会主义呢？我跟你们讲，实际上共产主义只会保障跟保护共产党员跟掌权者而已。那么现在我们先来看看博物馆内呈现了哪一些当年抗争者的状况。
It was a long process. It started in the mid-1970s, but one of the key developments was in 1980 with the foundation of Sardarno trade union. After the August agreements, the communist authorities agreed to officially recognize a legal trade union that would be independent from communist authorities, and that was a very big thing because that was the first fully independent social organization in the whole Eastern Bloc that was independent from communist authorities that otherwise wanted to have full control over almost every aspect of people's lives. This establishment of Solidarno in August 1980 started 16 months of the so-called Carnival of Solidarity, which ended in December 1981 with the introduction of martial law. That was basically a coup d'etat, almost a civil war against the society that somehow crushed Solidarność, which came out of this process a bit scattered and with less people, with smaller capabilities, but it overlapped with a big economic crisis because the centrally planned economy wasn't functioning as it should be. It might have had some positive aspects in the 1950s, where because it usually helps to rebuild economy and country from the war, from this kind of economic situation. Yeah. But in the 1970s and 1980s, that was not anymore the case, and there were more and more signs that this is a highly dysfunctioning economic system. There was an economic crisis that was also fueled by missed policies or wrong policies of the former first secretary of the Communist Party, Edward Gierek, who started an era of relative prosperity in the early 1970s. But that was
some of the Polish people are pretty nostalgic about Gierek.
Yes, to some extent, but this is only like 1971, 1975, because the whole economy then was built on foreign loans. But with every loan, you have to pay them back at some point, and the investments they made were not giving any revenue. So around 1975, the situation worsened. There were some attempts to help the situation politically by, for instance, showing some signs of democratization, signing international agreements like the Helsinki Agreements, but also some of documents drafted by the International Labour Organization. Yeah. That happened in 1975, 1976, and that later was used by the Solidarność movement as a legal framework for demanding the right to assemble, the right to strike, and the right to establish an independent trade union. But that was only a facade. I mean, that was not the intention of democratizing the society. But by the late 1970s and early 1980s, there was a big economic crisis. What people usually now in Poland remember from those days are huge queues to shops, empty shops, basically shortages of basic products, food. For some reason also toilet paper, which was a scarcity of that product throughout the whole communist times. And that, of course, led to discontent among the society. And that, of course, fueled the birth of Solidarność. But after introduction of the martial law, the situation didn't improve at all, economically speaking, but also politically. So throughout the 1980s, there was there were attempts to, on the one side, from the Sardarno camp, to recreate this network of strong pro-democratic opposition. But at some point also the communist authorities realized that this system is not self-sustainable anymore, not in the way it was functioning before. So around 1985, 1986, you could see some attempts of liberalization. It also overlapped with the politics of perestroika and glasnost introduced by Mikhail Gorbachev.
In the Soviet Union, yeah.
It didn't spread throughout the whole communist region of Eastern Europe, but in some countries you could see some attempts of that. But the reason for that was that also the communist authorities saw that their power is not as strong as it used to be. They don't have popular support, and also economically speaking, the country is doing really, really bad.
现在我们相对于过去的人来说，用上帝的视角可以了解到，世界上所有的共产主义国家，最后都导致工人的生活与工作环境比资本主义国家还要苦。各位想一下。既没有财产，工作环境差，工时长，政府也不会给你任何的保障，他们只会压榨你。还有，在共产主义国家，你也不可以没有工作，工作本身也是政府分配给你的。那你不想工作的话，你就是寄生虫，必须要被惩罚的。
Officially, there was no unemployment under communist rule. I would say even on the contrary, people were forced to take up jobs by the communist authorities. So you received a letter that you graduated from university. Now you will work as a teacher of, I don't know, Russian language, like my grandfather did. So he had to move and actually take up the job at school.
Even if he didn't want to work at school?
He didn't want to work at school, and he was trained as a chemist. But he knew Russian, so he was sent to teach Russian language to the kids. So officially there was no unemployment. If somebody didn't work, was perceived as an enemy of the state.
只有掌握资源跟分配权的人才有话语权。在这样子的一个世界，所谓的能力与一般民主国家的定义是完全不同的。你没有能力，但是你有党员的协同关系，你会斗争，你会贪腐，你会贿赂，还会剽窃，懂得狗腿，你没有道德下限。这样子，你才能成为资源的分配者，并且凌驾在法律之上。所以最后还是最辛苦的劳动力阶层被压榨的最严重。在民主国家，你至少还能保有一个正常的法律机制，而当年的共产政权并没有经过一般的波兰、捷克斯洛伐克、匈牙利的人民的同意，就要大家被迫接受共产的政权，因此也导致了大量的抗议活动。而苏共为了镇压与维稳，在这些国家建立了类似白色恐怖一样的秘密警察，还有鹰犬特务，这也导致人们多年来生活在恐惧之中。
Some people had some wealth before 1945, or maybe later that was taken away from them by the communist authorities, and also that happened with the church that was stripped of its properties over the years, especially in the 1940s and 50s, and wanted to claim back at least some of its properties. So there was also a challenge how to deal with this. Now, at the moment, the Catholic Church is the biggest landowner in Poland as a single organization, but that was a process that took around 20 years, actually, to reach that state. And there were people that were stripped of their factories, I don't know, famous bakers or people that were making sweets. Like there was a company in Warsaw that is now regained its pride, and it's now very well known. But under communist rule, this whole company was taken away from the family and put under communist management. But still remaining the brand that actually included the name of the family. Wedel, but also Blikla. There was also, and many others. I mean, that was also locally that happened to many companies, because in the 50s, 60s it was almost impossible to run a private business.
来换个场景，各位知道，追求自由是人类的天性。波兰人对于苏共造成的政府的腐败跟社会的停滞，还有各种打压，已经无法再忍受了。在最后那段长达约11年的镇压与抗争期间，包括波共政府强制在1981年实施戒严法令，最终在1989年自由选举之后， 波兰终于退出了共产主义集团。不久，德国柏林围墙也倒了嘛，整个欧洲大陆的共产主义政权就是继续倒台嘛。欧洲共产主义终于退出了历史舞台。那上一集我们有提到格但斯克的造船厂，就是波共时期的国营企业，在波共退出历史舞台后，格但斯克造船厂也改为民营企业。而这个博物馆也算是从党产的形态逐渐转型成为了一个开放的、有规划的现代空间。我们再看波兰被共产党统治的历史，必须要注意到一件事情，其实跟台湾威权的时期最大的不同就是在于经济。波兰人民共和国跟其他类似共产主义政权统治的国家一样，实施计划经济，因此民营的企业是非常的少，一般的民营企业也无法参与国家的关键的产业。而国营企业虽然说是国营，但实际上这就是党营，毕竟党国不分嘛，每个企业干部都必须要安插党员在其中，跟现在的中共一样。当然，所有关键的决定也必须要经过党的同意才能执行。那么，走出威权是一个非常大的挑战，对于前共产主义国家来说，挑战是更大的，因为除了政治上面的不自由，还有经济上面的困境。受苏联影响的国家在80、90年代必须要从零开始建立自己的经济。过去计划经济与党国的体制，让这些走出威权的国家必须要快速进行转型的改革。
So around 1988, the centrally planned economy was being dismantled more and more, and this overlapped in 1989 with deeper political changes. One of those changes was the agreements, the Roundtable Agreements, which were preceded by negotiations where an agenda was negotiated. What would be discussed at the round table? So there were two clusters. One of those was political liberalization, and the second one was economic changes. And both sides knew that at some point Poland will have to abandon centrally planned economy. And the question was how to do that and so forth.
所以这个本土化的意识已经逐渐成熟，对于党国不分的威权、政治宣传、党国体制的全貌也有一定程度的了解，所以对于厘清历史的真相的态度也越来越明朗跟开放。随着国际环境的开放，台湾人也比过去有更多的机会认识1990年代以来同样是走出独裁专制体制的其他国家的过程的全貌。